Last night we celebrated, we had a Shiva Ratri celebration here. This is why you see Ganesha and Shiva on the altar today. There was more. Last night we had the living presence in the form of various of our own friends who had been transformed into the deities for the purposes of our celebration. Two of the characters in the story were the sons of Shiva, and we fortunately had two young men who, 12-year-old or so, who came in, and they very ably played the part. I told them that, you know, when you assume the costume of the deity and go out, then you cease to be yourself. You become the embodiment of that one. And they did marvelously well in holding that energy in a very dynamic way. And afterwards, when we were returning them to their ordinary selves, I reminded them that if any of their classmates or their teachers give them any trouble, they should say that they have friends in high places and they can call on them to come. They seemed very pleased with that possibility. It's, of course, a very powerful thing from a young age to have the opportunity to step outside of this ordinary world. And you could see, I believe, that they were affected by it. They're young boys and they have their own ways. 5 minutes before they were transformed into living murtis, they were out on the basketball court. So, you know, it's a perfect analogy of our own lives, isn't it? Which is, on one side, we're living this completely materialistic world in which we have to be practical about the things that we do. And then on the other side, we're hearing the scriptures tell us, or we're having our own experience, that nothing in this world is what it seems. And all of these elaborate stories about the deities, which is the enormous culture of India, which has been going on for thousands of years, it is the only continuous culture. Of all the ancient cultures that they've been, they have all evaporated. Egypt has evaporated, Babylon has evaporated. I mean, the Bible is just full, especially you read the Old Testament. I mean, it's just the rise and fall of empires, mostly because God smites them for some reason or another. It's just, when I was reading the Old Testament for the first time, I said to Swamiji, Swami Kriyananda, I said, sir, you know, like, what is this? And because that's all it is that people get the favor of God and then they become arrogant and they disregard the favor of God. So then God stamps them out, usually in the form of barbarians coming. I mean, like, what am I supposed to learn from this? Doesn't mean that there's nothing of value. Swami's only comment was, well, it's very old. The book is very old, and a lot of time has passed. And when masters have revelations, true saints have revelations, they have to present it in terms that people will understand. Because we can say, just like this, you know, you are divine. Just as we were hearing Sharmila read to us, you know, we are not, this world is not what it seems. We are all these other things. But when one wakes up in the morning, let me phrase it more personally, when I wake up in the morning, the first thought is not, you know, here I am, the infinite spirit breaking on the shores of light. It's more like, oh no, do I have to get up? You know, it's just, that's just my honest human response. That's where I live. So there's a huge amount of translation that has to take place. And every saint, every master finds some way to translate. And because the Indian culture has been going on for thousands of years and has lived through the rising and the falling of the yugas of the consciousness on the planet, all of these different, it's accumulated without ever being annihilated. It just keeps accumulating and keeps accumulating. And some of the stories are more credible than others. Swamiji, being a very practical person and not at all intimidated merely because something is old, points out that the tradition of all of these stories has been an oral tradition until very recently, in the recent cycle of time. And when the storyteller gets a rise out of something, he's inclined to repeat it and even to push it a little bit more. So it's hard to tell, sometimes what's really there and what isn't. At the same time, we disregard these ancient traditions and these deities at our peril. And many of you have heard me tell the story of the time that we visited the ancient Durga temple in Varanasi. And that was when we were leading pilgrimages to India. We were taking Americans, mostly Americans, from Ananda to India, mostly for the first time, their visit for the first time. And we would have a local guide, and the local guide would be naturally quite full of the things that were important in his city for us to see, and yet we had a very specific agenda, which was to follow the pathway, the footsteps of Yogananda, we called it. And also, we were trying to thread the needle between Hinduism and the new expression of Sanatana Dharma that Yogananda brought. And so we were not really there to become Hindus. At the same time, there was much in the tradition we wanted to experience, and this is part of what I want to talk about going on today. But every so often, we would be kidnapped by our guides. That was really the only way we could say it. We didn't speak the language. We didn't understand the countryside, and sometimes they just felt that we didn't know as well as they did. So we were kidnapped, our bus of 30-some people, and we were taken to some ancient Durga temple, which was also affectionately called the Monkey Temple, for reasons that had nothing to do with Hanuman, that had to do with the fact that in the city of Varanasi, because they practice ahimsa, the monkeys multiply, and it's a big problem. I'm not sure, I didn't notice when I was just there recently as many monkeys as I saw before, but the monkeys get very, very clever. They'll take your glasses, literally, they'll come down, they'll grab your glasses off your face, and they won't give them back to you unless you give them a banana. Yeah, so when the monkeys come, everybody says, hold on to your glasses or put your glasses away. It's just a real thing. They're not stupid, and they live with people, and they figured the whole thing out. Anyway, going back to this, so we're delivered to the Monkey Temple, which is the ancient Durga temple. I really have to be careful, as you'll hear. But there were a lot of monkeys around, and not every pujari, not every priest is equally endowed with God with spiritual energy, and the priest who was there he was one of the less inspired priests, and because I was group leader, this is a big concept, group leader, he was determined that I should wear a marigold garland, except it was way past its expiration date, this marigold garland, and marigolds get a very pungent odor when they're just a little older than they ought to be. So he put this around my neck, and we're already kidnapped, and I'm already annoyed, and we're just there, and I do not have a high opinion of what's going on, and I'm literally walking around projecting all these negative thoughts. And so what happens is, I carelessly walk into the monkey pack. I just wasn't paying attention. So there's monkeys on both sides of me, and I must have interrupted a mother and a baby or something like that, because a monkey jumped on my back, literally. And it's not an experience I would recommend. It was quite startling. Apparently, though, I responded in the moment far more bravely than I would have anticipated. I literally grabbed the monkey and I threw him onto the ground. I only sort of know this in retrospect. And I yelled at him, "Get off of me, you filthy thing," I said like that. So I'm wearing this putrid marigold garland. There's a monkey on my back. I throw the monkey to the floor. By this point, every Indian in the place is there to save the poor white woman who's just done something so stupid. And so they're all protecting me like that. Meanwhile, the monkey just comes at me and sinks his teeth into what he hoped was me, but fortunately it turned out to be just my dress. And then I'm still fighting and yelling at him, "Let go of me, let go," like this. But he closed his teeth, and I took my dress, so there's a big hole in my dress, and he's got part of me like this. And by this time, I'm rescued. Here's what I want to say. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. I was about as far from pure in heart. I'm mad at the guide. I'm basically mad at all of India, you know. I'm mad at the monkeys, and I'm really, really not impressed with Durga, not at all. So I manifested my reality. I just manifested it perfectly. Putrid garland and all, you know. It's just like nothing looked like God to me. Everything looked like it ought to be different. I know how the world ought to be, and it should not be like this. And how's that working for you, honey? Not very well. Not very well. And I just felt it was what we call instant karma. Instant karma is really good karma. The reason karma, cause and effect in human life, is so difficult is because the effect is often distant in time from the cause. Because Master called it the thwarting cross currents of ego. Because ego has a lot of power, and we can force the world for a while to conform with our wishes. So if we do something that is a little nefarious and is not quite what it ought to be, is too selfish, is too disregarding other people, is too angry, is too vengeful, and you can all make your own list. It's a long list. And so the ego wants that, but we have momentum in that, so we can push other things and people and values aside and just keep running for a while. This is why good things seem to happen to bad people, and bad things sometimes seem to happen to good people, because we have thwarting cross currents of ego. Ego means identification with limitation instead of identification with infinity. But all of us, that's how we wake up in the morning. That's how we go through life. I'm hungry. I need to buy new clothes. I need to take care of my family. I want this house, whatever it might be. And those are not necessarily terrible things. But when all we're doing is just thinking about this limited self and calculating its advantage and making it work, surprise, surprise, all we see is limitation. And we don't understand. So we set something in motion, but we're so busy, it just takes time for the arc of that energy to work its way around and the consequences to come to us. And when the consequences come, we're startled, we're outraged. How can this be happening to me? And we don't remember anymore all the energy we put out. So when you have instant karma, it's very, very helpful. Bad, ugly thoughts about powerful deity stomps on you, just like that. Fortunately, the monkey tore my dress, not my leg. Mitigated instant karma. And I just, as soon as all that happened, I just went right up to the deity. I just went up to the deity. I'm so sorry. You know, whoever you are, whatever you are, I really respect you. I really understand. I'll tell you another story about the power of these things that you don't mess with. This is, again, the Indian culture. Things happen. Also in Varanasi, since that's where I recently was, and this is where this takes place, Lahiri Mahashaya, one of our gurus here, he lived in Varanasi, and he had a small house there back in the narrow lanes, and for decades, he meditated in that house, and he initiated people into Kriya Yoga. He had 2 sons, and his sons had children. So there's a lineage of people of the Lahiri family. Lahiri is just a family name. I've been corrected when I say Lahiri instead of saying Lahiri Mahashaya, because Lahiri is just a family name. It would be just like calling him Smith or Brown or something like that. So I always try to say Lahiri Mahashaya to be respectful. But there's this little house where Lahiri Mahashaya lived, and then a 5-minute walk away, a 10-minute walk away, there's a much larger house where the great-grandson of Lahiri Mahashaya lived. Shibindu Lahiri is his name, and he's part of what he calls the dynastic Kriya tradition. Lahiri Mahashaya's son Tinkuri had multiple sons, one of whom was Satyacharan Lahiri, who became the inheritor of the dynastic tradition, and Satyacharan's son was Shibindu. It goes like that. Shibindu, the house that Shibindu lives in is a huge and valuable property, and he asked us once when we used to visit there and on these trips, you might wonder how a humble family like ours got such a property as this. This is the story he told. Because on that property, when you go into the very spacious courtyard, there's a small temple. A temple meaning just a little cottage, just a small cottage with a very big Shiva Linga in it. And very, very nice. It seems like even there's a second one with a Shiva Lingam, I think, over smaller on this side. And apparently a family, a very wealthy family, perhaps even a royal family, bought that property with the Shiva Lingams in there, but they didn't reside in it. So they hired a pujari, they hired a priest to treat the Shiva Lingams appropriately. See, what the principle is that once the Murti means statue, and the Shiva Lingam is just an oval, an egg-shaped thing like this that represents the rising energy, but it is Shiva. It's the god Shiva. So you have to respect it, because once it's dedicated, it becomes the living form of the deity. And you can no longer just treat it like a piece of sculpture or a rock. It's now the living form of the deity. If Divine Mother was there, you would treat her respectfully. If Shiva came to live with you, you would treat him respectfully. You wouldn't just say, just help yourself to anything you want in the refrigerator, I'm going off for a week. You would constantly offer. So you hire the pujari to do all the rituals. So the family was at a distance, and they had hired the Brahmins to come in and take care of it, but they didn't. So the deities were neglected. And then gradually over time, the owners of that property started having terrible misfortune, one after another, after another. And they didn't understand what had happened to the karma of the family, and they found out that the deities were being neglected. And they felt they were in no position to ensure that they were properly taken care of, so they found the Lahiri family, which had a reputation for sanctity, and they gave the property over to them so that they would take care of it. And as soon as the deities were taken care of and the family had done right by it, their fortunes reversed. Now we can just say, what is all of this? But we say so at our peril. But here is the other side of it, which is very important, and which is, I'm sharing with you partly something that I've been thinking through a great deal and for the last 20 years, ever since Swami first went to India, and longer ago than that, from the time that I first went to India, which was 1986. Prior to that, I had lived, because I moved to Palo Alto a few months after that first India trip. I'd always lived at Ananda Village. And especially in the first 10 years, we lived so simply. You might call it primitive, but I would call it simply. It was wonderful. We were just out in this very isolated place. Email hadn't been invented. We didn't have telephones. We didn't have electricity. We didn't have television. We didn't have radios. We had our own little universe. Swami Kriyananda lived there with us. He was much closer to his years in India. He dressed in an orange dhoti. He wore a big Rudraksha mala on his bare chest in the summertime. We all had Indian names. We dressed in Indian clothes. And we were just privileged white kids, most of us college dropouts, but we were there living through some past life memory. So I basically thought I was a Hindu. I mean, I never really thought about it seriously, but I just assumed that what we were doing was what was being done in India. And so then 16 years later, 15 years later, I went to India, and I saw that what Master taught us was not Hinduism by any stretch of the imagination, with all the rituals and all the deities and all the stories and, you know, in the thousands of years of tradition. And what I could compare it to was Catholicism. I wasn't raised Catholic, but I could see that what Master taught was about as Hindu as it was Catholic, which is to say not very much at all, that what Master brought was an entirely new expression. That doesn't mean that there's no validity to what that has gone before, but it means that we are learning something new in the Yuga cycle, new to us. And it's deeper even than that. We are trying to create a revolution in our own consciousness. And it is human nature to try to associate the new with the old, and to try to get comfort from this is a lot like what I already know. And I'll take a little of this, but I'm going to hold to this, and I'll take a little of that, but I'm going to hold to this. I remember on this side when a few people who had been raised Catholic started going sometimes to the Catholic Church because it was familiar to them and they liked it. Swami was actually surprisingly stern about it. He said, don't be ruled by sentiment. And this is something that Master said to Dr. Lewis when Dr. Lewis had been involved. Actually, it was with the Rosicrucians, which was the closest thing that Master had found, that Dr. Lewis had found up until that time when he was really looking to become a disciple of Master, but he hadn't met Master yet. And he was the president of the Rosicrucian Society. And so he said to Master, what should I do about this? And Master said, don't be ruled by sentiment, which is an interesting thing to say, isn't it? It's like, this is familiar to you. You're comfortable with it. You've gotten a certain satisfaction with it. So I'll just hold on here. But what we have to understand, and what is the extraordinary challenge of the scripture reading for today, is that we have to move past all of these definitions. We have to move past all of this. And that does not mean, as I was explaining my story about the Durga and the story of the Lahiri family and the Shiva lingams, this does not mean that we disdain or we scorn or we denigrate where we've been. It just means, where am I going, not where have I been? And when I was in India this time, I was talking to my friends there, you know, like, how much of the culture you're living in do you add to what you're doing, and how much do we just stand aside? I went into the ashram in Mumbai when I first walked in there on a place called Mud Island. I think it's actually pronounced Mud Island, but I have a hard time saying that. Mud Island, which is just on the edge of Mumbai. Very peaceful, wonderful place. I walk in, they have this beautiful little shrine with a gorgeous Ganesha statue. I've been traveling a lot in the last few months. I'm standing there, I'm in Mumbai. I'm standing there, I look at the statue and I say, this is so beautiful, you must have gotten this in India. And then they reminded me that I am in India, and yes, of course, that is where they got it. You know, and it's beautiful and they respect it, but they don't do all the rituals. They light a candle, they keep it nice. And I'm saying to my friends, you know, like, this is a question, isn't it? How much of this do you bring in because everybody expects it? And how much of it do we just go on and say, Master brought a new expression? Master himself did very little. He could have brought us all of the Indian traditions. He knew them all. He brought the 2 mantras that you hear when we do our purification ceremony. He wrote 1 chant about Radha Krishna. I may have finished it right there. Even when he went back to India, he didn't assume Hinduism. And nor did he do a Catholic Mass when he was here. You know? He just didn't. Because this is a new expression. Because we are not working with rituals, we are not working with institutions, and we are not here simply to repeat everything that we already know and are already comfortable with. We are here to find who we are in a divine way. And we touch it, you know, we haven't done a Shiva, we've done Shiva Ratri here, but we did more last night than we have done for a long time. We celebrate Christmas with great enthusiasm. We celebrate Easter with great enthusiasm. We do a Guru Purnima celebration in the summer. We've cherry-picked here and there, bits and pieces. But we understand, or at least we're trying to understand, you know, who we are and what Master is really asking of us. And you see the power of this. It's exactly what Jesus asked of us. It's what Moses asked. It's what every avatar, it's what Buddha asked, which is the divine is within you. Seek ye first the kingdom of God. Where is the kingdom of God? The Bible, it says the people search for it, lo here and lo there. The kingdom of God is within. That's an extraordinary challenge. Master says the only place God can be experienced is the human nervous system. That is an extraordinary challenge. Now, we have our rituals, we have our family, we have our practices, but they're for one purpose, and that is to purify the heart so that we may see God. And all of these other realities, Durga and Ganesha and Shiva, the thing that we have to understand is that there was always a human instrument who brought these realities to us. And the ones that have power remain. I was in Calcutta once during the Divine Mother festivals there, and at that time, neighborhoods would get together and they would make big statues of Kali. And I was in a crowded place and I kept sort of getting pushed back. And finally, I was right up against the Kali without realizing it. And I turned like that. And the Kali's the one where she has the garland of skulls and the hair like this and the red tongue and the sword in her hand. And I mean, I back up and her sword is like coming at my neck. It's right like this. And I turn around and there she is. This was after the monkeys temple, so I was a little more respectful. And I just looked at her and I said, who are you? Like, how did this ever happen? That Divine Mother, which as we think of is very different than that, how did it ever turn into this? And what came to me, which I believe is true, some great saint, long since forgotten in history, conceivably some avatar, saw it. You know? And I'm going to use a small example backwards, but not to help with this. Swami Kriyananda prayed to God for a simple symbol that would represent everything that Ananda is. And that symbol, which is also on the wall over here, which we call the joy symbol, he saw it. He didn't know what it meant, had no meaning, he just saw it. And then he said he drew it dozens of times before he could get something close to what he saw. And then afterwards, he saw the mountaintop representing the aspiration of the devotee. He sees the soaring spirit going up and then, you know, joyously celebrating, but then coming down again to share the blessing. And then coming in that bird-like shape, again, representing the soaring spirit and the freedom. But he didn't think any of that. He just saw it. And ever since then, that's what we've been using. So somewhere this great saint saw Divine Mother, and she was cutting off our heads with one hand and blessing us with the other. And she was the master of life and death, which is the skulls, and she was in all, perfectly fantastic symbology. Swami said it's probably gotten more or less exaggerated for various reasons, because if it plays well, you know, it begins to get like this. But it was a way of communicating that which cannot be communicated. So it has to be absorbed intuitively. We have to be startled into understanding it, and we have to have the courage not to be ruled by sentiment, but to actually purify the heart of all fears, from all fears and limitations, so that we can boldly, courageously, and ultimately joyously simply perceive what is. Isn't that a wonderful life assignment? Isn't that worth doing? God bless you.